Today on the show, I got Karl Wienhold. Karl is dedicated to trying to better understand and undo extractive power structures that have oppressed people and degraded ecosystems to enrich others since colonial times. He studies value chains, trade, microeconomics, post-colonial development, and the like, often in the context of, that's right, coffee. He has worked as a management consultant specializing in international trade, in rural development focusing on tropical cash crop value chains. And since 2013, he has been advocating for smallholder coffee farmers in Colombia via the Cedro Alto collective. He is the author of the book Cheap Coffee, Behind the Curtain of the Global Coffee Trade, and is a PhD candidate in development studies at the University of Lisbon. I really enjoyed this conversation and have had a blast getting to know Karl. Definitely call him friend and look forward to more. But I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did and take away something to learn more about coffee inequality in our times. What's up, brothers and sisters? Welcome to the Get Mad, whatever you want to call it, podcast. I don't really know what this is. I don't want to have a podcast. But today we have Karl Wienhold, who wrote Cheap Coffee, Behind the Curtain of the Global Coffee Trade. How long did it come out, Karl? 18 months? 2 years ago.
Something like that. I think I finished it at the end of 2019.
Okay, so still pretty recent. So we have Karl on today, and we're going to talk about some fun stuff. Karl, thanks for joining, and thanks for taking some time out to chat with us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
So, coffee is a complicated crop, commodity, however we want to talk about it. As most people know it, though, it's our favorite dark black beverage that gives us the upper and the hype that we need to get our day or help us with our constipation, whatever it might be. You, though, have quite the background in working with coffee at a very grassroots farmer level. You've been in it for a long time. And we got connected because of your book, Cheap Coffee. And so what I really want to do is bring a lot of these concepts down for consumers and help them and even ourselves understand the complexity of the chain and maybe a little bit of the issues. And hopefully maybe a little bit of the solutions too, though we're still trying to figure that out, I think, right? So I guess just to start, Karl, could you give us a quick, right, understanding of the supply chain? And maybe even maybe there's two levels here, like a more condensed one, like is if someone's operating as importer and exporter, but also like a more complex one where there's more logistics and stuff. But just talk us through, what does it look like to actually get that seed from a farm to the cup?
Well, there are all kinds of options and configurations, and this depends on the context of growers as well as consumers. But so I think it makes the most sense versus going from start to finish to start at both ends, because the middle can look a bunch of different ways. But essentially, there's always a plant that produces cherries that get turned into green coffee, and then there's always roasting, and then there's a beverage. Mm-hmm. I think at that level, it's really simple, and it's only in the middle there where it becomes a business that it's evolved a lot over the years and looks differently depending on the context where it's coming from, where it's going, and how it's being treated in the middle.
Yeah, and from our end, we've experienced maybe more simplistic models where you have someone kind of operating as exporter and importer versus some countries where you have, due to the country laws or specifics, like an exporting company, but then there's also the importing company. So I think needless to say, there's a lot of hands that touch this coffee. But I'm curious just to hear a little bit about what drove, in your experience of growing up in Colombia, kind of the motivation behind writing Cheap Coffee. What were some of the things you were seeing that brought these concepts to light in the form of a book, and even why you got passionate about it? What were you seeing?
Sure. Well, in my past life, I worked as a management consultant. So I mean, I was a gun for hire of international capitalism, focusing on import export type stuff. But basically, whatever a company wanted to send something from some place to another place, I would go in and try to figure out how to make that happen. But as part of that job, which is common in that field, you get thrown into industries where you have no idea what's what and just have to learn everything as quickly as possible. So after a while of doing that, learning a bunch of different businesses, and then falling into rural development and agriculture kind of by accident, I was used to that, to have to get up to speed really quickly, doing lots and lots of reading and just figuring things out, knowing who the informants are and getting up to speed like that. So, I mean, that was my approach to coffee when I was working with it as a consultant. And then when I decided to shift focus a bit and put together a farmers collective in 2013, kind of took that same kind of semi-academic approach to learning as much as possible to make sure that I was behaving in a responsible way, learning where I might veer off path and then trying to correct. And that was a lot of work that took a long while. And I thought I was kind of getting somewhere with that. But I realized, I only have two hands. I can only do so much. And I only have the ideas that occur to me. So based on this information, I'm only thinking of some simple things that I think make sense. But maybe someone else would take that same information that I had the luxury of having time to comb through and digest over the years, and come up with even better ideas and do things a different way. So I just wanted to basically package up everything that I'd learned from other people, what other people have wrote and researched over the last since 2013 to about 2019, and just pack that into something that everybody could digest a little bit more easily, because I mean there are thousands and thousands of pages and conversations and interviews, things that went into that. So basically wanted just the rest of the coffee industry to have that same toolkit that I had. And in hopes that with that, some more innovative, better ideas than what I could think of would hopefully come out of it in the future.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think a good place to kind of move from there would be why is coffee all over the world, at least within the regions of the Ecuador with climate and altitude? I don't even know if a lot of people really understand how coffee got to certain places. And I know this isn't really related to economics, but to give people a quick backdrop of why coffee's where it is there like do you have maybe a quick backdrop historically of how coffee, obviously we know it came out of Ethiopia. If you don't know that and you're watching, now you know, but Ethiopia to Yemen. But from Yemen, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the colonialistic component, just so people understand, because I think as we get into some power dynamics and how decisions are made, that might help. But could you give us a quick backdrop of the history of coffee moving across to the Americas and the Asia Pacific area?
Sure. I mean, don't quote me on the absolute specifics, but my understanding is what I think is interesting about it is how consumption and production have moved, not exactly in the same way, but influenced by consumers. So it was, depending on which theory you subscribe to, it was native to what's now Ethiopia and South Sudan, first cultivated in an intentional way and consumed in what's now Yemen, entered other regions as a consumer good when the Ottomans got a hold of it on the Arabian Peninsula. That's how it got introduced into Europe, when those parts of Eastern Europe were no longer part of the Ottoman Empire and part of other empires, and all these alliances shifted around. It got all around Europe, and then as Europe European culture spread around the world, so did coffee consumption. And there are a bunch of details in that story and a bunch of fun little stories about the botanical gardens and sending this one tree on a ship, and like one seed survived or something.
Well, some technical difficulties there. That's a first. I don't know if you can hear me, but you are frozen.
I see you as frozen also, but I also hear you.
Oh, there we go. You're back now. Are we good?
Okay, yeah. I see. Cool. I see you again also.
That was weird. I haven't had that happen yet. No, you're good.
Yeah. And anyhow, supposing that kind of fits together, I'll try to figure out where I can pick up again. Where was it? Your European powers.
Fun stories and plants traveling on boats and European powers. Yeah.
So colonies controlled by European countries and back up. Europeans got a taste for coffee, also had these colonies. So one of the things was to grow the stuff that they wanted in these places. So it got planted in Brazil and the rest of South America, and then Central America. It's the African colonial period was a bit later, but eventually got all around, and now there are even some strong consumer markets in the countries that produce it, even though it wasn't planted for domestic consumption. But again, as cultures travel around and get mixed up and blend together, this is what we have. I think Brazil is the second largest consumer country in the world right now.
Yeah. And I think what we can obviously, anyone, if you just do any historical research, obviously most coffee producing countries are going to have a tie to some colonial power, whether it be Dutch, French, German, UK, US. And as early as the early 20th century, some countries just started producing. And I think even for people who know a little bit of current trends in consumption, Vietnam being the second highest producing country, that was only in the last few decades, so so much shifts so quickly, but it is tied to these unique power dynamics of how people took a crop, took something to a particular place. Am I
sorry, I just wanted to add one more little thing. Sorry to
yeah, no, there. Please.
I think it's interesting, despite that coffee's consumed in a lot of places in most countries in the world at this point. 70% of the worldwide production is still exported, and that includes a massive amount that does not get exported from Brazil. So if you take Brazil out of that equation, I don't know what the number would be, what it is, but it would be much, 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 much greater. And especially if we're talking about specialty coffee, which is consumed in large part in the global north, we get another strange, not strange, but a unique dynamic that really bears a resemblance to the former colonial supply chain setup. Despite that, now these are all private actors. There's some interesting parallels to be drawn.
Yeah. Totally. And I think one thing that's maybe helpful for the audience to also understand is that majority of coffee producers, smallholder farmers. We're talking people that have anywhere from 2 to 5 hectares as a family. And you might know off the top of your head, what for specialty coffee, at least we're talking about 85% of specialty coffee is produced by smallholder farmers, right?
I don't know about specialty specifically. I think it's like 80% is produced by smallholders of all coffee, and that's without a doubt going to be higher for specialty.
Yeah. And so that's where I want to turn this ship, because so we have a base understanding, coffee spread coming out of Ethiopia, South Sudan, Yemen, cultivation, but here we have it all across the Americas, Africa, Asia Pacific. via over the centuries, oftentimes tied to colonial powers, and majority of which, 80%, being produced by smallholder farmers, 2, 5, 10 hectares, probably max. I want to give some statistics, and I just kind of want you to talk to them, because I think when people hear these, it might kind of trigger them. Like, what? They're not going to maybe have known this. I didn't know this when reading your book. So knowing that now about smallholder farmers, large landowners, and I don't know how we want to define large, but obviously more than 10 hectares, significantly more so, I'm sure. They own only 3.5% of the farms in volume, but 48.6% of the land, and producing 57.8% of the coffee. So let's let that sink for a second. Very, very small percentage by volume of farms are large landowners, but over half, almost 60% of coffee produced is coming out of these places. So, whoa, what's going on? Let's this is.
Did I write that?
Oh, it's in the book. Yeah. Oh, I mean, and it's statistically, presuming your book is correct, but I could give you the source. I could find it real quick. But I think the part that I want to pull out of this is there's a supply issue, right? You have all these small farmers, but majority of the actual coffee being produced by people in power dynamics. And I'm just more curious to hear from your end how you've seen that impact the industry, and kind of how that's even causing decisions being made now.
Yeah, well, I think if we're talking about the difference in size of coffee producers as landowners, as farm owners, I don't know that there would be a really noteworthy power imbalance between them, because they're kind of all on the same team. I don't remember exactly where that number came from. It must be like one type of coffee or one region or country or something, because my understanding is that the vast majority of all worldwide coffee is produced by smallholders. Of course, larger farmers, which are few, produce much more than small producers. But I think the vast majority of all coffee and is produced by smallholders, and an even greater number of total farms are small ones. And where I think there's a potentially problematic power asymmetries between farming as a node in the value chain, and subsequent links, which are much more concentrated. I think over 50% of all coffee in the world, of all green coffee in the world, is traded by one of 5 or 6 companies.
Right.
How they measure and publish those numbers changes a little every year. It's like 50% is owned by 5 of them, or 60% is owned by seven of them, something like that. And roasting is a similar situation. Again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's something like over half is controlled by a handful, about 5 companies, whereas coffee is grown by 24 million farms.
So maybe let's take a step back then, and maybe I'll reevaluate throwing that in, because I don't want to throw you off with that statistic. Maybe the focus then. So then there's 2 areas my brain kind of goes to. One would be talking about that middle ground, right? The person bringing out and putting in the coffee, playing the middle role between producers and consumers and or roasters. But then also maybe looking at the economics of the price and value decreasing, but consumer pricing increasing. So we could go either route. And I think the pricing economic structure of it is obviously just as important, because wanting people to really understand the fact that international pricing has gone down overall, but consumer pricing has gone up 240%. So we're charging more. People are paying more. We'll stay in the realm of specialty, I suppose. But the farmer is still not really receiving much more. So maybe let's dive into that a little bit. What's going on with decades later and even 3 decades of specialty coffee really booming, but nothing really trickling down into the actual producer's hands?
Yeah, this is something interesting. I mean, it's troubling, but it's also interesting from an intellectual perspective. This sequence of events. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially right now that overall prices are rising a bit, and just in my interactions with specialty roasters, I feel them really struggling, really hurting based on this increase. So that got me thinking, if the base prices have been basically falling for the last 30 plus years, and specialty as we know it today, third wave, if you will, has only been around for, less than that, and has been growing amid falling prices. What's the causation? I hope it doesn't get too dark, but like thinking about how this was able to begin to exist. How was specialty be able to begin to exist? This is, we think about it, and I've always thought about specialty as an opportunity for farmers, to get out of this commodity trap that has them stuck in the cycle of poverty and earn higher prices for what they're doing. But now that the base prices for regular coffee are much, much higher than even what they were earning for specialty a year ago. And now specialty is saying, now what do we do? And farmers are saying, no, I'm not making specialty anymore. That's so much more work, and I'm only going to get paid a tiny bit more. What if the third wave was only able to grow as much as it has and become an affordable luxury because the base price was artificially depressed to a level that was causing a lot of small farmers around the world to be desperate for any kind of survival strategy? Not an opportunity to enjoy prosperity by any means, but as a way to avoid poverty or to mitigate poverty. And honestly, that's kind of how I see this. Just based on what you mentioned, that this transmission of prices from the retail level to producers, that retail prices have been increasing quite a lot. And it's not that roasting has been just a massively profitable business. I guess it has at some levels, which we can see by the kind of venture capital frenzy and private equity activity around it. But cost structures have also increased in step. So is all this contingent on a market that behaves the way it has for the last 30 years? Or is there a way to guarantee that even non-specialty farmers of mild Arabica are not in poverty and actually have going above and beyond and doing innovative things, offer some measure of prosperity even.
Right.
I think that's what we're going to see in the next few years, and it might mean the overall market shrinks. So,
just to give the audience some context, all these trades are going to be happening off of the C market, and then usually a differential, a higher mild Arabica price. And 18 months ago, that C market price was sitting at about $1 for a while. Obviously, we've seen it fluctuate a ton over the last 2 decades, but 18 months ago, about $1 for a while. But the last few months, it's been sitting around $2.40, $2.50. So we have a 2.5x change. Now it's dropping a little bit, but I don't know. Maybe let's get dark, because I can't help but think that in that same time period of it being so low, which clearly, if we want to at some point get into the idea of cost of production, which I think is valuable, because understanding the variables of what it costs to produce something, whether from my end or the producer's end, more importantly. But was there an ability to grow something because of kind of a false low price that now there's such a high concentrated amount of money in a particular sector. And again, we can keep talking about specialty coffee, but you go into any shop and the lowest price you're going to see is probably $13, $14 for what someone's going to deem as specialty. But there's also not a lot of transparency of what that actually even means and where that coffee is coming from. So you say you have some roaster friends who are feeling the pain of it, but I'm just going to go and say it like, yeah, I have some coffees that I bought last year for literally like 30, 40% lower than what I'm paying for right now. But my margins may be adjusted. At the end of the day, my 12-ounce bag margin is maybe adjusted 2%. And I did not raise my prices. So like, I don't know, really? Like, what's the issue then? Like, are we worried about the 2%? Are we looking strictly at margins and we're saying we have to be at a particular margin? And now I'm just blabbering, but like you do address these ideas of individualism, which is a common issue with, say, neoliberal economics. But I don't know. What are you seeing? Like, how did it get built? And where's all that money going to? If the consumer's paying a 240% premium increase over the last 20, 30 years, I mean, I think we kind of know the answer where the money's going.
And I'd like to know that for sure myself, because I agree with you. I mean, there's room there. I mean, there's room between even the new green price and the consumer price. But I mean, also, I've always found it absolutely incredible that the owner of the company can be standing in front of a 2-kilo machine, every day of the week, and that company's still profitable. There's still a decent margin there, and at the same time, they can access good quality green coffee. Whereas there might be another company that's has one person managing 3 40-kilo machines at the same time, and doing things their way. There's massively different cost structures, and how could they both be feasible? And I think that's where we're starting to see things get squeezed. It also depends what green prices were starting from. Where were they before this increase? And based on their individual supply chains, how did they evolve? Like yours has changed 30 to 40%, but others have more than doubled. So because you're already paying higher than a lot of other folks, maybe the difference hasn't been so huge for you. But for others that are now paying double or a little bit more, then that's going to be a bit tougher. And it depends on their supply chain on the origin side, what producers are willing to do. I mean, the ones that I deal with mostly in Colombia, I mean, we worked on a fixed price basis since 15 or 16. And only now are adjusting up because the market is above where we had them fixed before. And these are going up, but they used to be much higher, above the C price than they are now. They were double at some times, and now they might be, I don't know, 20, 30% above. And then some farmers are saying, you know what, it's not enough. It's not enough to be worth doing this anymore. But that's going to come down to how the cost of production has changed, and I mean, personal family life factors for each producer.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you guys set those fixed prices, was it based more off of cost of production and cost of living in a particular region that you guys developed that?
I mean, it was kind of getting pulled by both sides. So looking first at cost of production, what do families hope to earn? What do they need to earn? What would they be happy with? What would make them happy to have their children continue growing coffee? Because that's really what we're interested in. Not me, but if that's what they wanted, then that's kind of the indication that I would look for. And then on the other side, what will roasters pay for this? Because if there's no overlap between those, then there's not much we can do. But luckily, there were in most cases there was an overlap, not in all, of course.
Yeah.
But that's how we worked for a long time, and that was always being adjusted. And I'm sure there's more detail we could have included, but everything was kind of on the back of the envelope back then.
Yeah. I don't know. I think one area that I would be curious to just kind of touch on would be it and I don't know. I don't want to get too heady economically, but I do find it intriguing enough that if we can explore and understand why certain things exist from an economic level of what was implemented in the last 40, 50, and even 100 years, how that's impacted not just the consuming country, but also the producing country. So we've seen a very strong influence of the free market and these neoliberal economic concepts, even on the producing side. And in one of your recent videos, you kind of hit on the top 3, 4, 5 reasons why it doesn't work, or at least based off assumptions. And I'm just curious to have you list those off. I mean, I think starting from that level, such as things like we already mentioned, individualism, is maybe helpful for people getting a bird eye view on why the generalization of saying something like, oh, the free market will adjust as it needs to doesn't quite work. What are those 3, 4, 5 things that are assumptions that you see are not working, especially having been on the ground with producers and stuff like that?
Sure. So first, I want to be an annoying teacher and clarify one thing. And neoliberal economic policy is one thing, and this is basically trusting the free market, taking advantage of the comparative advantages, inherent endowments, and that if you take advantage of those and invest in those, then you'll be better off. You can sell the things that you can make cheap, make more money, and then buy the things that you can't make as cheap as somebody else. And this has been arguably a dominant philosophy in much of the world, especially the world that's influenced by certain multilateral agencies since about the 80s, maybe the 70s. Especially in Latin America, there's a big shift at one point. But that's a whole other thing, especially in the context of coffee after 1989, when the International Coffee Agreement, in its last in that manifestation, stopped controlling supply via quotas in order to maintain prices within wherever they wanted to maintain them. On the other hand, neoclassical economics is a whole academic school of thought, and is basically the only kind of economics that's taught at quite a lot of institutions. I mean, that's the only kind that I was taught in university and beyond. And we never even knew we could question it, but this really does rely on some assumptions. And stop me if I get too far into it. But basically that in free markets, which theoretically are the markets that we allow to be free, even though I would argue that they're never actually free, because it can't happen. There's never perfect information. There's never perfect competition. Under these assumptions, the current price is always the equilibrium price. It's perfectly where supply meets demand. So if you don't like the price, then too bad. There's people who subscribe to this school of thought, which is a lot. Take a look at the coffee price, and we're complaining about the coffee price, and say, "What do you want to complain to the weather forecaster that it's raining?" No, the price is the price. What do you mean it's below your production cost? You must be inefficient then, because if the price were below the production cost, the price would rise, because people would stop growing, because it wouldn't be worth it, because people are self-interested, they are rational, and they're not going to do something that does not maximize profits. But yes, they will. This doesn't work for so many reasons. So yeah, I've basically just been trying to draw attention to those flaws, to kind of try to open up this field, to include some more ideas that normally just get knocked down straight away by this like mainstream economics thought of what's possible and what's impossible.
Yeah, and I'm even pausing right there. I think, there's such an assumption that someone has the ability to choose something else. When most of these smallholder farmers, even if they have other crop, coffee's still going to make up such a significant portion of their annual revenue. Where else do they go? I mean, the farmers I was just visiting in Oaxaca, some of them literally had no other options but the 4 hectares of coffee.
Exactly.
And so I was thinking about the other day how, I've had past staff on maybe the retail barista level who, it's easy to complain. We all complain, but it's like, oh, I'm not making enough, or this isn't a good place for me. And it's like, we take for granted the simplicity that someone has to literally go to the next place they want to go to. Like in America, at least, and I'm sure other parts of the West, you can choose another career if you want. It might be hard, no doubt, but you can even go find another coffee job that maybe pays more. It's pretty easy to do that. There might be a little pain involved, and you might have to be without work for a couple of weeks, but that's pretty basic compared to someone who's literally maybe 3rd, 4th generation farmer and has no other options and literally lives in a small town in the middle of the mountains. That's a pretty strong assumption of the free market, it seems.
Yeah, and this gets into a bunch of weird things like that I've been working on some other stuff around price elasticity of supply, and it sounds super boring, but I'm going to try to make it interesting at a later date. But basically, it's like when the price rises and or falls, how do producers react? Theoretically, when the price falls, they produce less. When the price rises, they produce more. And I mean, that's price theory. And I mean, I think that checks out just based on common sense. But they want to, I guess, neoclassical economics wants to create these equilibrium models where there's one curve and that like there's just this shape. So it goes up, then you follow this line. It goes down, you follow this line. But my position is that this curve is inadequate because what happens, at least in coffee, and is well documented, when the price rises, and you're in a coffee growing community, and maybe there's some land that's not being used for anything. There's some land that's being used for a couple of other things like food crops, maybe some cattle is common. Who knows what? Maybe a lot of annual crops. And then when the coffee price rises, people say, "Oh, great! This is an opportunity. I'm going to plant some coffee." But once you plant coffee, it takes 3 years to be producing. To produce something that you can sell. And with the price being as volatile as it has been for a long time, it's impossible to know whether you're going to plant this coffee. The price is still going to be attractive once it starts producing. And you don't know who else is producing. You don't know what future supply is out there because nobody knows who's been planting what in the previous 3 years. And as soon as all that hits production, then the price could drop. So when the price rises, there's a tendency to plant lots and lots of coffee to get a piece of that action. On the other hand, when the price drops, that elasticity equation doesn't really hold up going the other way. Because again, just intuitively based on common sense, and I've yet to create these models, but the way people work, the way human constraints and family budgets work. Say you plant this coffee, you wait 3 years, you spent everything you have to plant it, and you went through all of your savings waiting for it to produce. Now it's producing, but guess what? Your first harvest, price is terrible. It dropped so much because everybody at the same time was planting. And now the market's totally flooded with all of these new coffee trees that are finally producing. What do? Do you cut them down? I mean, if we're assuming that everyone is rational profit maximizing, then they're unprofitable. You cut them down, you plant something else, you do whatever with that capital, that land and cash and your working hours that makes you the most profit at that moment. But no one would do that. I mean, you spent so much money and time and waited 3 years taking care of these trees that you expect to be producing coffee for 25 years or more. You're not going to cut them down and just say, you know what, forget it because we had one bad harvest. No, you're going to tighten your belt. You're going to, go without a lot of things and wait until the next harvest and hopefully it gets better. Because I mean, you have a 25-year potential profit stream that you just spent everything to get. And if for one bad year, you're probably not just going to throw it all away and, I don't know, plant avocados or something and then wait 5 years. No, nobody has the savings to do that. Nobody, I mean, at least when we're talking about smallholder coffee producers that normally don't have much of reserves or savings. So when the price rises, the supply will increase quite a lot 3 years later. When it falls, however, people are going to suffer quite a lot and continue to produce at well below anything close to what could be considered a living wage, and a lot of times well below even their production costs, going into debt before they'll throw in the towel, because throwing in the towel when there's no savings, there's no alternate opportunities, could very well mean losing the farm, losing the lifestyle that they may have enjoyed as a family for many, many generations, and then getting pushed into urban slums or who knows what. Yeah. But this is really common also.
Yeah, I kind of want to take a step back too. We mentioned quickly the idea that a lot of the movement of coffee is overseen and powered by a very small handful of companies. And I'm curious to kind of hear that bargaining power and distribution of power issue, because obviously, from one end, you'd think that the farmers could have some more say in what they're going to sell, but I think you even say in your book, like you're able to bargain at a farmer's market, but not Walmart, right? And I'm curious just to kind of hear you quickly touch on the general thoughts of that concentration of power, and even maybe define monopsony for us, because I think a lot of people might know the term monopoly. They hear that, and even we have some issues here with monopolistic power and antitrust laws. But what's monopsony, and how is that really an issue with farmers earning a living wage?
Sure. So most people know monopoly is when there's one seller and everyone who wants what they have has to pay whatever they want to charge, like owning the intellectual property for a life-saving pharmaceutical product. You pay it or you die. You can charge whatever you want because anybody that wants it has to get it from you. And especially if you need it to live, you will pay absolutely as much as you can get your hands on. So that's one seller, many buyers. Buyers have no power over the seller. The seller has all the power over the buyers to set price, terms, conditions exactly how they want, and no one can do anything about it. Monopsony is just the opposite, where there's one buyer and lots of sellers. So hypothetically, and not factual, there's a lot of coffee growers that need to sell their product so that they can eat and have whatever they need. And there's only one buyer. So what's the price? Well, whatever the buyer wants it to be, because what is the seller going to do? Tell them no, go somewhere else? No, there's nowhere else to go. So you take it or you take nothing. That's monopsony. Of course, in pure form, these probably don't happen all that much, except for like this intellectual property of pharmaceuticals example. It's usually going to be an oligopoly where there are few sellers, or an oligopsony when there are few buyers. Leaving that right where it is, theoretically in coffee, there is no potential for bargaining power to affect price. There are no price takers and there are no price makers, theoretically, again, because there's a terminal market. There's the C price, the New York C price, the KC future contract, where you can technically sell coffee and buy coffee at that price. So, I mean, this is an attractive proposition, this like securitization, or this creating these terminal markets, because there's essentially an auction going on all the time. And isn't that the fastest way, the most efficient way to find that market clearing price? I suppose, yes, under certain conditions, if all buyers and sellers have access to it in the same way, all the product is exactly the same, then maybe so. But I'm wondering, and I guess asking everyone, how is it possible that there is this efficient market, there is this terminal market where there are no price takers or makers, and everyone has the exact same bargaining power, everyone is subject to the exact same conditions and rules, but profitability, rent capture along the value chain has shifted so dramatically over the last 30 years in favor of downstream actors. I mean, I guess in theory, well, that's just the market. That's just the market doing what it does. That's just efficiency, because somebody figured out how to make coffee for cheaper and is happy with that price. And if they're happy to sell at that price, someone else is happy to also buy at that price. So everyone just gets exactly what they want. But then that gets us into some weird territory with different types of coffee, and that's another thing that I don't want to get too far off topic here. But basically, the argument I'm making that in the book I cited some people that have also suspected this and have some arguments and evidence that it's probably happening. But what I'm working on right now is actually quantifying and measuring this association, that there is bargaining power exertion. Right at during the same period where trading and roasting activity became very, very concentrated, profits also became very, very concentrated with those same actors. The downstream end of the supply chain the actors got much, much bigger with respect to the upstream side of the supply chain, farmers. And during that same time, the way profits are distributed between the two shifted very dramatically in favor of the ones that were getting much bigger. And size is of course one of the main indicators of bargaining power, one of the main circumstances under which it could exist. But this is very, very tricky to prove because you can't say like, how did this negotiation go? I don't have a tape recording of all 24 million farmers in the world selling their coffee and understanding exactly how we arrived at those prices and what social pressures they felt and what options and alternatives they had. So the best thing we can do, and again, what I'm working on is trying to demonstrate the conditions under which bargaining power is possible and the concentrating effects of it, and comparing this with circumstances under which it's less possible and evidence that it was less exerted on farmers.
Yeah.
So really, really tricky one. But actually, speaking of monopoly, this is the last one. Sorry, I get excited about this one. But it was, I think, 2019. There's a paper from Columbia University sponsored by Jeffrey Sachs, who has done a lot of work in development economics and has started to do some work with coffee in the last few years. And I'm not going to go into qualifying that or laying down my critique. That'll happen another time maybe. Sure. But what I found really interesting in this is that they mentioned the possibility of setting a price floor for coffee because they mention that it's highly possible that it's priced too low because there might be monopsony pressure being put on the price. Of course, they didn't say that there was, because again, it's super hard to prove something like that. There's always going to be some kind of deniability, and you probably make a lot of enemies. But maybe I'm a little less worried about making them at this point. So I'm going to give it a try. But this is kind of inspiring that they went as far, and it is going far, to publish in a major publication that's going to be read by lots and lots of people, that there might be something like that. That it's like nobody even mentioned it even under their breath before then.
I think it is fascinating, even though it's just theoretical at this point. But one thing I think about is like, okay, so there's this fear that if we set a price floor, which as you've mentioned in the past or in another video, that even that in and of itself has concerns because it could just distract from the real solution finding, but still maybe a good temporary reality. There's this concern that, therefore the prices are higher, therefore we have to inflate the consumer end prices, which therefore means consumption is going to drop. But I mean, it's 2022, man. Inflation right now is 7.8% in the US. I don't see anyone buying less beef or chicken. So I don't see how that's actually true. Like prices are crazy right now. And when I say 7.8%, that's just average. I think beef is up like 150, 200%, whatever it is. And yet also oligopoly of 4 or 5 major meat companies. And yet no one's decreasing their meat consumption. And so I generally ask, will coffee consumption actually decrease even if people want to raise their prices to keep their margins? I don't think it would, but I would also like to think that maybe if there's a higher concentration of quality, transparent players in the game on this end, at least consumer education would allow them to shift to buying the right coffee or the right priced coffee, even if some of the big guys are raising their prices. But again, talking about very complex, very difficult, very long-term things.
Yeah. This is also another really interesting one. It's something I've done a little bit of research on post book publishing. That what would happen if coffee got expensive? Mm-hmm. I think there's 2 things here. One is if all coffee got expensive, and another one is if only one brand of coffee got expensive. What would people do if all coffee got expensive? There's some studies, at least in the US and Europe, that say that they will probably buy just about the same amount, at least up until a certain point. But if one brand of coffee got expensive, then people would probably just go to the other brand. Because people, according to neoclassical economics, people maximize utility. People have finite amount of resources, and they're going to divide those resources in the way that perfectly gives them the most utility, whatever that means to them. Whether that's perfectly true or not, I think it is undeniable that those incentives exist. And I think what myself and some colleagues have been talking about for years about the pricing of coffee is that we just need everybody to agree to increase prices, and then everyone will have to increase them the same way. No one will be at an advantage or disadvantage with respect to the other brands that are out there. And all it took was a frost in Brazil and losing millions of bags of coffee for everybody to come together and get that done. We'll see how long it lasts.
Yeah. I mean, the contrarian in me is just kind of like, I mean, if we can raise prices and people pay it, fine, but also maybe we just take less margin. I don't know. I mean, you brought up a good point earlier, and that got me thinking, okay, you do have roasters who are generally operating on a 3 kg, 2 kg machine. Their cost of production from a consumption roaster side is completely different from a bigger roaster. So you have all these scales, you have them, you have people like us who are right in the middle, 12 kg roaster, and then you have people 25 kilo, and you have people 7,500 kilo, and obviously beyond. But the idea of focusing on the costs or the margin is, I think, one issue that. But again, I don't know if we can ever change the mentality of greed and making more money. So maybe that's not probably a good focus point. But other than trying to set an example, but I guess these things could be talked about for hours. They're very. I want to make them simple, and I want people to really just understand the complexity of them, so that they can maybe appreciate what they buy and drink, as well as appreciate those who are really working to impact the industry. I guess, I don't know, maybe one area I wouldn't mind kind of having you jump into for the sake of time is just, you talked a little bit about at the end, and I do want to touch on solutions, but for you and your research and your experience around producers, what is sustainability? How would you define sustainability on that end, on the producing end, and on the end of trying to improve the lives of producers? And I know that's going to get super complex region to region, but as general as possible, what is sustainability, and what maybe even needs to happen to help promote that? If I'm not getting too, if that's not too general or complex.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to give you a straight answer because I don't know. I just don't know what is sustainability. I mean, I know in theory what it is. It's something that is or is happening, having the ability to keep existing or happening infinitely. Can there be sustainable coffee then? I don't know. Maybe not. Can there be sustainable only coffee? Probably not. Can there be sustainable coffee with other measures being taken that makes it environmentally sustainable and still allowing for this product to be created and shipped across the world? Maybe up to a certain amount. But would it be economically sustainable for the people growing it to do that based on what roasters and consumers are willing to pay? I don't know. I don't think we've tried it yet. And I mean, I would say on my version of sustainability that my version doesn't matter. I think the version that matters. I mean, if we're talking about the social and economic side, because of course the environmental side is more science, more objective. But when we're talking about individuals, the only version that matters is the version that they decide for themselves. What is sustainable? What are they satisfied with? What are they content with? What working conditions and livelihood do they want to have? What standard of living? Like we talk about a living wage. Is having a living wage sustainable? Well, what is a living wage? What is it? What is it for coffee farmers? What is it for baristas? What is it for roasters? And this is where it gets pretty weird because we shouldn't. I mean, the ones that have a tighter grip on the purse string shouldn't be deciding what sustainability or a living wage is for other folks. They can only decide that for themselves and decide whether this livelihood strategy is working for them. But at the same time, it's tempting to suppose that it is working for them just because they keep doing it, whereas it may be because simply of a lack of alternatives. Unfortunately.
So what's the goal? Like, what's the goal? What's like, why, without also trying to be a white savior and tell people in another place what even they should want, right? But I don't know. What's the goal? What are we doing to expose the issues in the supply chain? What's kind of I don't know, like what's in your perfect
there's things
world
that just make sense. Yeah. I mean, when coffee farmers are unprofitable, they're obviously not earning a living wage by any sense of the definition. And it doesn't matter what their definition of that is. If they're unprofitable, they're not earning it. So
that's a good baseline.
It's just
costs
super obvious.
Taken care of, costs covered. That's step one.
Improving farmer income when it is insufficient based on some metrics. That's a good thing. Again, the environmental side is it's complicated, but it's pretty objective. So we can learn about that, learn about these ecologies, about native wildlife, what types of growing systems are objectively more environmentally sustainable than others, and also what the economic implications of them are. But then beyond that, yeah, I think it is really important to keep in mind that for all of the good intentions and all the good we want to do, there are some things you just can't consume your way out of. I think there's a responsibility when we have access to these levers to make changes and put pressure on people to do things in different ways. Then we kind of have a responsibility to take advantage of those levers. But only, I think, up until a certain point. Like, I always feel really weird when I see things like folks on the downstream consumption side of coffee trying to tell farmers what to do with their money. Like, well, these farmers are just going to go get drunk with their friends, so I'm not going to give them money. I'm going to build a drying bed. I mean, they're grown people. They're also adults. I just think it's super weird when we get into things like that. So really, I think in summary, supporting supply chains that feature agents that normally don't have agency, which in a lot of cases are coffee farmers, are smallholder coffee farmers that are normally left out of these discussions, are left out of conversations as to how they're presented about what their acceptable standard of living and living income is or should be, and what conditions they're able to be afforded, what prices for their coffee are reasonable or fair. I think their voices need to be heard in this. They need to be making those decisions. What is fair? What is not fair? What is acceptable? What is not? At the beginning, just like, I'm going to sell my stuff. What can I do with my own money?
Yeah. I mean, is that where a co-op might come in? And I'm sure you have a lot more experience with co-ops at the farm level. So like, if a co-op is a group of producers, 20, 50, 100, 300, whatever, there's a lot of times the leader or the chair, people, whoever is kind of heading the organization, is that a good start in terms of, hey, we have 300 farmers in this co-op. Here's their voices. We know what they want in terms of having a better life. Would that be a good place to start in terms of, okay, if we need to hear from the people, then obviously there needs to be a collective of sorts in order to hear the voices. Do you see that? Do you see that in cooperatives that you've worked with and even your own that you helped initiate, like that there's that ability to kind of collect the voices and have a common goal and purpose, not just economically, but even otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, generally, unless farmers, like almost all of them, quit and farms just get really massive and there become many fewer of them, this equation wouldn't necessarily change. Agency would not just spontaneously be granted to producers. The bargaining power equation wouldn't spontaneously shift in favor of them. So yeah, horizontal integration, assembling larger scale based on the small scale of a bunch of integrated people or operations is a great way to do that, to amplify the voice of each one. And then coming down to like decision making, farmer agencies built into these kind of structures, a lot of them have problems. It's a difficult kind of an organization to run and to keep organized. But like we could compare a co-op to an exporter, like a private exporter versus a co-op doing exporting or something. What metric are we going to look for? Oh, well, this exporter hired these agronomists. This exporter paid them these prices. They gave them these gifts. They built the school, whatever. Nice. I mean, better than not doing those things. But if we're talking about a co-op, I mean, it's the farmers who control exactly what gets done with the entire budget. What about the profits in a co-op or any type of collaborative structure like that? I mean, there's a lot of varieties, and those words take on different meanings depending on geography. But the fact that the person that's writing the check, so let's say we have these like garage doors in the small towns where people show up with whatever form of coffee that they're selling in the place where they are. There's someone who's at a desk that takes a look at the coffee, decides what it's worth, writes a check or passes a wad of cash or something. I think there's one really important question. Can that person fire the farmers or tell them to not come back? Or can the farmers fire that person? And that's exactly the difference between these structures. That, you know, in a collaborative structure, the farmers can fire the people who run the thing if they're not doing their job in a way that favors the farmer's interests.
Right.
If we're not talking about one of those structures in a standard private business, which of course there's nothing wrong with at all, that power dynamic is quite different, and that's what we see today when there are five trading companies that run half the coffee in the world and 24 million farmers. If one of those 24 million farmers isn't happy with the conditions they're getting from one of those five companies, do you think that those conditions are going to change? No, because there are 24 million minus one other farmers that they can also get coffee from.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to get depressed from these conversations, but it's hard not to.
I hate that I do that. I'm trying to change.
It's not you, right? You're just the relayer of information. But that's the part that I want more access to, is how, because I really do think data and education is going to be the foundation of any real change, whether it's the base level of education as a kid or even going to college, or data and education for a consumer. It's all kind of the same to a degree. And so having access to that, the problem is it's been created to be such a complex structure, for better or for worse. And so there's a lot of education that obviously has to happen. I don't know. What are your, to bring it maybe to somewhat of a close, to protect your time and people still being interested in this after an hour listening. What are some of the solutions that you're working on, or that you're seeing, or that do give that glimmer of hope, even if it's just a sliver of a group of people in a particular area? What's the positive stuff that you've seen that makes you wake up and keep doing this work?
And I see another generation of coffee farmers, of young people interested in continuing to do this work, curious, innovative, interested in doing this in a way that provides them with a more satisfying lifestyle, but also just getting excited about like the nuts and bolts of it, the nerdy side. I see like coffee farmers learning to be baristas and things like this, that it's expanding, I guess, the frontiers of this community, that people are relating across the world on a deeper level, getting to know one another, even in like superficial ways, understanding that there are human beings that are essentially the same at all points on this value chain, even though the organizations that represent them are super different and wield vastly different bargaining power and ability to get the other one to do certain things. I guess just those one-on-one connections, recognizing that they're all people and interest in change. I talk with people like this call probably once or twice a week, because a lot of people are interested in stuff on the farming side as well as on the consuming and roasting and trading side. Digital solutions are coming at us from all sides. I don't get too far into this kind of stuff because I don't think there's like an app that's going to fix everything. But I think there are a lot of interesting thoughts and different interesting processes going on now that could one day evolve into tools that could let individuals around the world work with each other in a way that doesn't need massive amounts of private equity capital that requires certain return on investment no matter what, so that we can just first make sure that all of the nature and the humans are taken care of, and kind of know on the other side what's enough, what's too much, what is going to make this whole thing work. And when the whole thing just doesn't work in a way that lets everybody be whole and get what they need, then we should find a different thing to do or another way to do it. Just like recognizing those things, these variables, the flexibility and the complexity that we have, that everything is a function, that I want this, but if I turn this knob, then all these other knobs are going to turn and they affect actual humans. And there's these kind of processes that are going on. These kind of conversations are really inspiring. And I think we're a long way from any sort of solution. And I don't think there will be like a breakthrough massive explosion that's right. Just going to like sweep everything away. But right. I think the more of just like the trading volume that gets switched from one type of supply chain toward other types of supply chains that offer the marginalized individuals more agency. Every time one bag of coffee from one of those types of supply chains replaces a bag of coffee from one of those mainstream supply chains, then I think that's progress.
Yeah. I agree. And there's not going to be a quick fix. There's not going to be anything that changes it overnight. So definitely long-term investment on all ends is required. But Karl, I want to be protective of your time. I really appreciate it. I hope the audience received something out of this, and maybe if not, at the very least, they walked away going, my head hurts. That was a lot, and don't know how to digest it. But either way, hopefully enough to make them think that the next time they're buying a bag of coffee, they're like buying it with even that little bit of extra intention. Thank you.
Or if they want their head to hurt a little more, they can just buy a book.
Yes. So please go buy cheap coffee, but for real. It's available at least at Roast Magazine. Is it on Amazon? Not that we want to support
It's
Amazon.
digital on Amazon.
Okay, cool. It's digital on Amazon, so maybe you like to read on your Kindle. But do check it out. If you have any interest in economics and just understanding the general modes of supply and demand and how the supply chain works, but particularly with coffee, it is fascinating. Remember, folks, we're talking about one of the highest traded commodities in the world here. So that's arguably not slowing down, even though production is slowly decreasing. But that's why we need more people to get involved. So let's start with cheap coffee and hopefully get more people to come up with some solutions on how to help the industry stay afloat, do better, and also ultimately impact producers. So, Karl, thanks for your time, man. Really appreciate it. And we will have all the information in the show notes, including links to Karl's book and YouTube channel. Those are some fun videos. Please check those out. There might even be some little fart memes thrown in his videos that are worth watching just for that. But definitely check it out in the show notes. And until next time, Karl, have a great night, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, you too. Thanks so much for having me over.
All right.
Get mad. Get mad, Priest Coffee.